Hi, you guys. How you doing? It's Saturday night for most of you, I think, yeah? Look at all of you in chat. It's good to see you. I know it's been a minute since we did a storytelling and world building stream, but, a lot of stuff happened. We had other things to do, and now we're back around to it. And, this was by request. Something I haven't touched on a whole lot in these things is interpersonal dynamics, relationship building. We talked some about dialogue and how to keep that natural, but there's more to it than that. So I don't really have a script for this one. I'm just going to ramble and take your questions and just sort of explore how to tell a story with people that makes it feel like people. Honestly, that's what it comes down to. So that is where we are. Let me go ahead and transition over so I can see you lovely people. Because I can see you. I can see you. Hi. All right, so let me think of where to start. So we did talk a little bit about dialogue. And God, this music in my ear is really loud. I'm going to turn this down just a tiny bit. Why is it so loud for me? Because it's distracting the ever-living shit out of me. That's why my headphones are turned up to like 1 billion. Okay. Now I can turn this part back up again. Why are my headphones turned up so high? I sure as shit don't put them on that level to edit. Okay. That is much, much better. I can manage this. Okay. It's a little loud for you too. Okay. We're going to get this fixed, you guys. We're going to fix the music. Whoop. All right. It should be better. It should be a much more background low-key vibe for you. Why is my hand up? Good Lord, fingies. Okay. So I figure we'll start by talking about what we talked about before with dialogue. And for me, it's one of those things where if the actual litmus test for writing dialogue is to read it out loud. And it does feel stupid to do that, but genuinely there is no better way to test and see if your characters are speaking like actual people. And we talked about some of the basic rules. Don't have them say each other's names when they're speaking to each other unless there's a really, really compelling reason for it, because we don't do that when we talk to each other. You know, if I'm talking to Halo, I'm not going to say, "Hey, Halo, how are you doing, Halo? Oh my gosh, Halo." Like, he knows I'm talking to him. There's absolutely no reason to keep putting a name in there. And that is something that even some of the best writers do, and it makes me batshit crazy because nobody does that. Nobody talks like that. Nothing ruins my immersion more than that. So that's thing one. Shut up, Halo. How dare you? How dare you trigger me in this fashion? So thing one on dialogue is that. Like I said, the thing to remember about dialogue and keeping it natural is just try to speak the way people speak. I feel like a lot of writers, when they're writing dialogue, try to implement the same rules and parameters to their dialogue that they do to the rest of their writing. And it ends up sounding very stilted and very formal. And it's interesting because for some writers, this is a huge hang-up. I've read some, massive, popular, published writers who have put out 1 million books. And you can tell this writer's problem is dialogue. Like, they're good at everything else. They can tell a great story, they can do great descriptions, but when it comes to people talking, they drop the ball. They can't do it. And you just sort of like suffer your way through the dialogue parts and hope they come back around to something good. And that's a shame because it doesn't have to be that difficult. If they just read that shit out loud, I think they would realize, oh man, this isn't actually how people speak. So... yes, everyone talks like that, NG. Thanks for pointing that out, NG. I appreciate it, NG. Yes, obviously, if there are exceptions to these rules, if the character warrants it. And that, I feel like... I'm not going to qualify everything I say with except for when there are exceptions, because I'll be perfectly honest, that should be obvious. Like... of course, there are going to be characters who are set apart by their interesting manner of speech, by their lack of contractions, by their their cadence, whatever. That's what makes them interesting. And I write those characters too. I've got, the mech characters and things like that. Aqua, hello. But for the most part, when we are speaking about people, ordinary human people having ordinary human conversations, if they sound like data, there's a problem. That is a problem. And yes, that is a good way to make your characters stand out and be set apart. If you really want, if you're good at writing dialogue anyway, and you want to make your characters stand out for that reason, then yes, you can make them all stilted and they will stand out. If you're shitty at writing dialogue, though, it's not going to matter because it's all going to sound like that, they're all going to sound like data, or they're all going to sound like, and not just for the cadence and things like that, also for word choice. I know there are people who use ginormous words in conversation. I avoid those people as much as I possibly can. Because holy shit, that's annoying. And it's it gives me vibes of people arguing on the internet. When they suddenly pull out the thesaurus because they feel like they have to make their point in the most eloquent way possible, in a way that makes it sound like they might have just walked off the Harvard campus a minute ago. You just don't know for sure, but gosh, they're so smart because they know words like superfluous. And it's okay, and that's not to say you can't use big words in dialogue. There will be reasons to, there will be technobabble reasons to, there will even be just regular dialogue reasons to, and having a full rich vocabulary is fine. I'm talking about people who stack them, who put 6 or 7 massive words into their dialogue and expect that to flow with their readers, because if you have to stop and look up the vocabulary that someone is using, your immersion is ruined. So yes, background is very relaxing. It's just a vibe. Hey, smoking. So, those are just some of the basic rules. Also, bear in mind things like when people answer phones. This is a pet peeve a lot of people have, when people don't talk on the phone like normal people. In TV shows and movies, even in writing, people will say hello when they answer a phone. They will say goodbye before they hang up. This is normal behavior. Again, in a normal dialogue setting, not necessarily a special setting where there is a reason for being very abrupt or people are speaking in codes or something like that. Scrabble tournaments. Scrabble, we played Scrabble here a week or two ago, and I'd forgotten how much of Scrabble comes down to the complete luck of the draw on those letters, man. That, you may have the best vocabulary in the world, but if you draw 4 M's and a Q, you are just fucked. It does not matter what you have. It doesn't matter what your knowledge is. Okay, hold on. Fingies are twitching. There we go. Fingies back. Fingies here. Fingies aquí. Yes. All right. Bro. Yeah. And I feel like another thing that writers do is a sort of lazy shorthand for establishing a character and a style for that character is trying to write dialect. God, that bugs me. And it's not that you can't write things if you're writing a southerner with an accent, you can drop the G's on the end of your ing words and, call someone dumpling and stuff like that. But when you lean so hard into writing a dialect that every word is some variation of the word it is based on, and it becomes almost impossible to read properly unless you read it out loud and go, oh, okay, that's what he's trying to say. That's really... no. I don't love that. It's not a good vibe. It feels like you're sort of brute forcing not ethnicity, but a cultural thing that doesn't necessarily need to be there or is being handled in the not best way. Yeah, extreme dialects do get boring quick. You can establish with just a couple, drop a couple of G's, not yours, NG. Drop a couple of G's for a southerner, and there you go. You've established they have an accent without having to rewrite every word they say in a weird-ass fashion to convey their accent. There's no need for it. There's absolutely no need for it. And things like that distract. And a lot of this is going to come back to the real basic, just fundamental of writing, which is don't yank your readers out of it. You want them to stay. You want them to be immersed and engaged and so deep in it that they lose track of time. That's what you want for your readers. And every time you throw a roadblock in front of them, every time you make them have to Google something or parse what somebody is saying because the accent has been written out so fucky-wucky, you're pulling them out of that immersion, and you're making it more likely they're just going to put the book aside and walk away. It's not a good look. So, hey, Rusho. Live recording, just a Just Chatting stream. We're talking about storytelling and world building. We're talking about relationship dynamics. For my characters, do I have notes on their style of speaking? Hi, Muffed. No, not written down. I have it in my head. Ceci has a vague southernness to her. It occasionally slips out, usually when she's preoccupied or distracted, pensive, and more emotional than normal. She's got a lot of control over herself, but when she's feeling stuff, she can sometimes get a little more southern, which is basically how I am in real life. Because we've spoken before about how when I learned to speak, I was living in the panhandle of Florida. I was surrounded by people with southern accents, and I began speaking with a southern accent. So when I start to slip back into that, it's easy to slip back into that. I don't try to, because then I was raised, for most of my life, or most of my childhood anyway, firmly in the Midwest, not that far from university. Well, I say not that far, a good 4 hours away, but still, University of Wisconsin at Madison, which is where, for a long time, broadcasters would send their journalists to train to not sound like they have an accent. So wherever they would, because this is what journalists across America, not necessarily other countries, but across America, generally speak the same way. They don't sound like they are from the place they are. If they're speaking in Boston, if they're speaking in Atlanta, if they're speaking in LA, they sound kind of roughly the same. And the reason for that is because of the training that they get. So most of that, a lot of that comes from University of Wisconsin in Madison, or at least it used to. I'm not sure if it does anymore. But yeah, so a very neutral American Midwestern accent is what a lot of them are going for. I'm sorry, Risha. It's all good. Whatever's keeping you busy for 3 weeks, I hope it's good. I hope you come back, everything's fine. Much, much love. Okay, so, hydrate. Ooh, good idea. Actually, all I have on me is a cold hot chocolate, so, which defeats the purpose. All right, so we talked about accents a little bit. Let's talk about actual relationship dynamics and how people interact with each other. And I'm not just speaking about romantic relationships, although that's going to be a large chunk of this because that is a lot of what I do. This is one of those things that... No Diet Coke. No, I forgot to get one out. I've been busy. I realize that to an extent I do shoot myself in the foot with this, and we have talked about this before, where sometimes when people listen to immersive audios, like the ones that I do, they're not there to experience reality. They're not there to experience how people actually interact with each other and how relationships actually develop. They're there for wish fulfillment. They're there for an escape. They're there to pretend, to play pretend, and have, over the course of an 8-minute audio, somebody fall madly in love with them and never want to leave them. And that's okay. That's perfectly okay. I am a big fan of escapist media. I used to read a shit ton of trashy romance novels, honestly, just to although, to be fair, I really liked the era they were set in. I would page past the sex scenes, which is really terrible, I know, but you can only read so many Regency era sex scenes before it's can we get back to the plot, please? Because the plots were sometimes pretty good. But anyway, neither here nor there. I do appreciate escapist literature, and I get why it's a thing, and I get why it's appealing, and I have the hardest time creating it. I just can't. I can't make myself do it, and that is a weakness on mine, on my writing. Because if I were better, I would be better at doing that. Not because I think it's good or good storytelling or good writing, but because people like it, and who cares if it's good? It's an escape, That's my favorite condiment. I don't normally do condiments, but I do dip my potato gems in ketchup, so I guess I'll say ketchup. Jojo, hello. That Coke got canceled a little bit. Nah, I actually have my little mini fridge here next to me. Thank you, Halo. And it has 2 Diet Cokes in it, and I might reach them in a second if it doesn't deactivate my fingers. So it is just out of reach. But I probably should get it out because I haven't had any caffeine yet today. And that is going to bite me in the ass later. Yay. I can't be good at everything. I mean, yes and no. Like, when it comes, like, I'm not trying to be good at everything, but when it comes to writing, especially writing for an audience, and you know what the audience wants, there's something to be said for giving them what they want. Not all the time, but I feel as though I have a particular hang-up with relationship writing. And that comes from a couple of places. One is my deep-seated need to write things as accurately as possible. It's really hard for me to do things that I know are contrary to reality or contrary to, and I'm not talking about like fantasy and sci-fi, obviously. You guys know I write a shit ton of that. But once I've established rules of a universe, I want the rules to stick and I want to operate within those rules. I don't break the rules if I can help it. And when I'm talking about like a comfort audio or a friends to lovers audio, the universe is established because it is our universe, is where we currently live. And interpersonal dynamics are established. They exist. So, canceled Maltesers make... Yeah, I saw that. It's okay. It's all good. Have a good one, Risha. So that's thing one. And thing two is that I also have a hang-up about modeling certain kinds of behavior. It's one of the reasons why I don't do yandere audios pretty much at all. The ones I do are extremely tight-leashed and not remotely at the level of most of the ones that are out there. And it's because of my need to keep things in a healthy place. I am not comfortable with content that in any way validates or encourages behavior that is not healthy, that in any way normalizes that sort of behavior. Because let's face it, we can see the effect that has. Like when things like that become normalized, shit gets scary. You know, we've seen it play out firsthand, not specifically with yandere audios, of course, but in real life, in various forms of media. The more we normalize things like being shitty to each other, being racist, being sexist, being homophobic, being transphobic, that shit kicks off. And the people that are like that are more encouraged to be like that and more encouraged to go harder with it. And then it snowballs. And I realize that my part in this play is very small, but I would not be able to sleep very well at night if I was contributing at all to the furthering of unhealthy dynamics, put it that way. And when I see drama like that playing out in real life or with people that I know or whatever, I generally try to stay out of it because A, it's none of my business, but B, I feel like any attention on some of that is bad attention. You know, even if you're trying your best to educate, even if you're trying your best to make a teachable moment out of something that is quite bad, sometimes you end up having the opposite effect. So when I feel compelled to speak, like I did about when the Wizarding game came out a few months ago, I did feel compelled to make a statement because I will use my platform if I need to. But after that one statement, I'm not going to talk about it anymore because I don't want to add fuel to the fire. So, okay, you contribute to homophobia. Oh no. Valid and great. Thumbs up for homophobia. Woo! All right. So yeah, relationship dynamics. I could very easily write something where, and I say easily loosely because for me it's not easy, but you know what I mean by this, where it's just, oh, I just met you. Wow, you're incredibly attractive. Hey, we should go for coffee sometime. Oh my gosh, did you know I love you? Like, wow, that's bad. Like, it's just bad. It's bad writing. It's bad relationship unspooling. It's just fucking bad. It doesn't mean you can't enjoy it. If that's your trash, hey, go for it. But there has to be, for me at least, a level of actual storytelling structure. And so we talked before about the basic structure of storytelling, the inciting incident, which basically kicks off things for the main character, the lock-in, where the character is completely committed to pursuing this path, the rising action, the mini climax, basically, which usually resolves the main action, but then there's sometimes a twist in the third act, which ups the stakes. Now we're not just trying to save the town, we're also trying to save the world. Stakes are upped, massive climax, falling action, new normal. That's the pacing, basically. That can apply to relationships as well, and frequently does. But there needs to be a reason for your characters to lock in and to do the work, to follow this path that they are on together. And that can vary a lot, but there just needs to be something that is drawing them together, something that is putting them together. And I'm not sure if you've heard the term, but there's a term called the meet cute. And this is very common in movies and TV. The meet cute is where your two romantic leads, your breeding pair, if you will. I love that term, even though it's kind of outdated, because it reduces them to basically what they are, let's face it. In a heteronormative media, it is the breeding pair that shall go forth. I see you guys in the chat. The meet cute is where they meet each other. And not necessarily meet each other for the first time, but when the relationship starts, when the part of their engagement with each other that is romantic kicks off. And it doesn't have to be, love at first sight. It can be two people bumping into each other at a grocery store. It could be two neighbors who are fighting over a fence or something like that. There could be a lot of things that is your meet cute. Why am I getting a face for breeding pair? Come on, you guys know how this works. We are a wildly heteronormative media in our society, and that is generally how this shit works. And you know it. It is disgusting. It is absolutely disgusting. And yet here we are. It is not a surprise. This is not, and I did not coin that term either. A lot of these are industry terms, or at least used among people in the industry, not necessarily publicly. Or the exchange of information after a car accident. Exactly. Disco Stang, like Disco Stew. Disco Stang's his older brother. All right, so yes, there are lots of incidents that can throw your main characters together. They might already know each other in a vague sense, or maybe they're, one of them's coming back from college and sees the other for the first time in a while, and oh my gosh, you're not the same person you were before. You've all grown up now, or some shit like that. So, anyway, meet cutes. That kind of gets the ball rolling. Usually after the meet cute, there is something that takes them apart and then brings them back together again. And that can vary a lot. And a lot of this you can't necessarily do in, say, a 15-minute audio. Which, again, when you do things like this, when you're working in a very narrow format, whether it's a poem, an audio, a short story, anything where you need to conserve space, anything where you need to get your story told in as efficient a way as possible. A lot of it comes down to framing. Where you enter the story, what the parameters already are. So, for example, in a lot of my Friends to Lovers, you can tell within the first 30 seconds these people already know each other. Maybe they work together. Maybe one of them works for the other. Maybe they went to school together. Things like that. But you try to establish pretty much from the start, without an exposition dump, thank you very much if you can help it, how they know each other, that the fact that they do know each other, and what that means for the story going forward, how that becomes the foundation for the relationship that you're about to build. Because of that, you don't need to spend a lot of time explaining the background if you insert yourself into the story at the point at which XYZ is already established. So they already know each other, or they go to school together or whatever. You don't have to beat that dead horse. You don't have to go on and on about, remember on the first day of school when we first met? Doesn't matter. The point at which you enter the story is where you start unspooling that relationship dynamic. And you can establish that pretty quickly without too much effort. And your audience doesn't need much. They really don't. They just need enough to go, okay, these people are coworkers. Gotcha. And that's it. They just need enough to feel comfortable in that space. And after that, they can focus on the characters and how they speak to each other and how they interact with each other and how that sort of unfolds. Like, that's what they're there for. And that's not just true of things like audios. That's true of a lot of stories. Most of us are there for interpersonal dynamics. That's what makes a story interesting. I saw a really great video essay about the movie Titanic and how it was actually a lot better than people kind of give it credit for, because it was such a popular thing that people think it can't also be an art thing. But the thing about Titanic is it was kind of a hard sell out of the gate when you think about it. It's about a boat that we know sinks. We know what's going to happen to the boat. None of that is going to change. It is going to sink. Yes, we've had this conversation. But what we don't know is these characters. We've never met these people before. We've never met Jack and Rose. And how they interact with each other is what makes that a good story. It has nothing to do with the boat. The boat is just the framing device. We know it's going to sink, and we know these two may or may not survive. But the fact that we get to know them as characters and their dynamic with each other is what gets us invested in the story. Nobody gives two fucks about the boat, you know? It's just, other than, hey, cool special effects. But we're there for Jack and Rose. We're there to see how this plays out for them and what happens with them. And yeah, they kind of suck. Let's be honest. Like, Rose kind of sucks. But the poor boat. Yeah. Starting after the second meeting and then referring to the first. Yeah, exactly, Aqua. Like, you can refer back to something and be like, I mean, literally, Lupus and I have been doing that lately, where it's like, hey, remember that time we went to that restaurant and XYZ happened? Wasn't that funny? And it's like, you can do that. Like, you can refer back to stuff in a casual conversational setting, as long as it doesn't become this heavy-handed, hey, remember when we met that time and blah, blah, blah happened and then blah, blah, blah happened? Oh my gosh, that was weird. Anyway, because that just becomes an exposition dump, you know, and it's not how normal people would have a conversation about something that was a shared experience. My heart will go on every radio station. Yeah, I've only ever seen Titanic once, because that's all I could sit through. It's just such a long movie. And it is absolutely designed to tug the heartstrings. But every heartstring tug there is comes down to the people. When you see people, you know, hugging on their beds as the water rises and stuff like that, like, that's what you're engaged with. That's what gets you. You don't feel bad for the damn boat. I'm sorry, Bodie McBoatface, but no. Why does Rose suck? And I touched on this a little bit. It's not that she super sucks. Two reasons that kind of stick out to me. One, she throws the frickin' diamond in the water at the end. Like, she knows that is what they're there for. And she just chunks that shit. Which, okay, I guess it's hers, but it's kind of a shitty thing to do. Like, genuinely a shitty thing to do. And then the second thing that gets me about her is that they go to extreme lengths to show us that after she was rescued, she had a full life. She travels apparently to this research boat with all of her family pictures, like pictures of her learning to fly a plane and pictures, like her rich full life is laid out in little framed pictures as she's lying on her bed that she brought with her and set up. And then when she dies in her sleep, where is she? She's back with Jack on the boat. Nothing that, like, apparently she had, like, a husband and children and grandchildren and all that other shit. We know she did. None of that matters when she's dead. All she wants to do is get back to Jack in the boat. So it kind of makes you wonder if she was ever, like, if she was just sort of always in that space, always just trying to get back to the boat, like her whole life. And it's a very... It's a dissonance thing. There's a level of dissonance there, because you can't have it both ways. You can't say, look at this amazing life she went on and had without him. Look at how great, you know, she was able to do it without having to sell the stone, because she still has it. She was able to claw herself up from nothing, give up that whole rich life of hers, and go forth and be, you know, girl power, gaslight, gatekeep, whatever, and build this beautiful life for herself. And then also have it be that all she ever wants to do is go back. Like, you can't, those two, the juxtaposition is jarring. So that bugs me. Yeah. Those are the things that bug me about Rose. She's not a terrible person. And as she is framed in the movie, she is, you know, young and very inexperienced and exploring, and that's great. But what they do with her after, I just can't really reconcile in my head. And she had to get married in order to survive. I mean, to a point, yes, but the pictures, they really drive home this fact again, that like, and they chose to do this. James Cameron chose to frame it as, look at all these pictures of her adventures and her life and all she learned and all she did. Like flying, learning to fly a plane is not something a lot of women would get to do. And she did it because she's so empowered. And look how far she's come since she was just this little waifish creature on a ship surrounded by rich people. And then she just goes back to the fucking ship surrounded by rich people. Like, it's like, and I get that it probably lived in her head as a fantasy. I mean, she and Jack did not get a lot of time together. She was very young when it happened. And everybody's got, the one that got away. In her case, quite literally the one that got away because he died. Like, it was very traumatic. It was very scary. That whole thing, yes, I get it. But she lived for 84 more years. Like, we're meant to think that she made something of herself, and that was what her focus was. She fought her way through and did this, and then in the end, it doesn't matter. None of that signifies. It's like planting without payoff. They plant all this amazing stuff that she has accomplished, and then the payoff just isn't there. She's not in a place with her husband or her children or anything like that. She's back on the boat. So, what troubles me for 500? Honestly, if you have questions about things that bug me in media, you are welcome to ask. I have thoughts. I have a lot of them. But yeah, anyway, circling back though, the point is that the boat wasn't the focus. The relationship was the focus. And that is, for a lot of things, what we tune in for. That said, I do have a special circle of hell set aside for people who shoehorn romantic shit into movies that do not need romantic shit. And I'm also going to touch a little bit here on like Dungeons and Dragons and things like that, because I am absolutely baffled by the concept that people will join a campaign or create a character just so they can have this like surrogate romantic experience. I don't understand. I've heard so many stories about people in D&D groups who basically try to force romantic outcomes, either with NPCs or with other players. And it's like, on the one hand, like my psych brain goes, oh, well, they're trying to fill a need. They're, love starved. They're attention starved. They want to feel cared for. And they will do it in this sort of escapism, wish fulfillment space. But the problem is they're not alone in that space. There are other players there whose agency also needs to be addressed and who may not want to be pushed into something like that. And it has, from what I hear, caused quite a few rifts in D&D groups, which is very puzzling to me. It's all good, VOD. It's puzzling to me that people work so hard in those spaces to manufacture a relationship between imaginary characters. And I say this as someone who plays D&D. I like it. I like D&D. I like my character a lot. I put a lot of work into her and her backstory. She's amazing. She's not me. She's just a character that I play. But when I think about like the group I play with and some of the other characters, and I trust these people. I love the people I play with. They're amazing. Lupus, Tham, Luna, they are all amazing people. But I can't even wrap my brain around the thought of trying to like orchestrate a romantic encounter between our characters. Like that just, no. I'm there for the adventure. I'm there for the story. I'm there to develop my character far beyond something like that. And again, I'm not trying to judge too harshly the people who want that sort of experience in their D&D. I'm judging the people who either focus entirely on that or push so aggressively for it that it makes other people uncomfortable. Those are unhealthy relationship dynamics. And I feel like the same goes for, like we talked about just a second ago, movies and TV shows where there is no need for a romantic subplot. There is no need for any of that shit. It doesn't belong in the story. But because they think that that's what the movie-going public wants, they will 100% shoehorn that shit in there. And of course, the best example I can think of is the Hobbit movies. There was no weird-ass elf-dwarf love triangle in the book. None of that existed. And it didn't need to be there. The Hobbit as a story has nothing to do with relationships like that. The relationships that matter in The Hobbit are the ones between the Hobbit and the dwarves of his party, and how they learn to respect him and appreciate him for his skills, and how he learns to come out of his shell and have adventures, and how they learn to work together. That relationship dynamic is strong on its own. When you throw weird-ass relationship shit in there, like romantic stuff, you weaken the crap out of it. And it sucks because, and spoiler if you haven't read or watched The Hobbit, it's whatever. When you have a scene structure, the things that come last are generally the most important. That's just how it works. Like when you're building to a climax, the last big thing is implied to be the most important big thing. In the Hobbit movies, Bilbo crying over Thorin is secondary to what's-her-face crying over dead sexy elf, or sexy dwarf. The scene that should matter more is Bilbo's scene, because he's the Hobbit, he's the Hobbit, and his relationship to the dwarves is the whole fucking point. That is the point. That is what we are there for. And yet when you follow that with a second death scene between two characters that weren't in the book in that way, she wasn't in the book at all. The only named female character in The Hobbit is Belladonna Took. And I think she's dead before the book even starts. So there are no named female characters in The Hobbit. Because it was real. Oh, no, it was not. It was shoehorned and manufactured. It was crap. What was real was the Bilbo stuff with the dwarves. That was the stuff that should have mattered. And the studio got so hung up on we need a romantic subplot. We need this. And it's like, no, you don't. You do not need that. It is so dumb. And I feel bad for everybody involved because it just weakens the shit out of a story that was so good on its own, because not every relationship needs to be romantic. You can have an adventuring party in D&D or in The Hobbit or anywhere else where they have a strong friend dynamic. In fact, a really good example of this was the D&D movie that just came out not that long ago. The two main characters, the bard guy, Chris Pike, and his best girlfriend that was she barbarian? I forget what class she was. That sort of co-parented his daughter and like went out and did missions and stuff together. There is never a point at which you think those two are together. There's one comment made in a tavern where they're like, where someone assumes they're together and they're like, no. And they just sort of leave it at that. But they have this best friend vibe that is so pure and so nice. And it's like, more of that, please. Like, they've got each other's backs. They trust each other. They've known each other a long time. All of that is established by the story. And you don't need the romantic stuff. You don't need them to have a moment right before the big fat dragon comes for them where it's like, just in case we don't survive this, I've always loved you. Like, fuck off. No. Like, they're close in their way. Have a good one, Starhop. So yeah, stuff like that. Like, more of that, please, where it is a friend dynamic, even friends of different genders, God forbid, who just like each other and look after each other and take care of each other. It's such a healthier and more robust vibe. You can do a lot more in that space. It's not as limiting as romantic relationships tend to be, especially in media, because boy, do they lock you into a silo. So yeah. This is going to be a really ranty stream, isn't it, you guys? Fuck. That's okay. You knew what you signed up for. You're here for a reason. You're fucking here for it. All right, so you learn more about emotes. I got some good ones. I like my emotes. Okay, so writing healthy relationships. Whew, boy. Now, I am going to talk about romantic relationships for this part because they obviously, for better or for worse, they do tend to be very prevalent. People do like them. They get very engaged with them. They get very attached to them. People like their ships, they enjoy their ships. And again, I feel like it's important. It's almost imperative if you are a creator of media to do your best to model healthy versions of relationships wherever possible. And again, it's not a bad thing if somebody is an unhealthy asshole because it tells a good story. You need conflict to tell a good story. You need obstacles in the path of your protag in order for them to build a satisfying character arc. This is established. Bad guys are okay. Shitty people are okay. Having people that don't respect other people's agency and are just the worst, sure, absolutely. They're good for a story. From a storytelling standpoint, those people are important. You need that. What you don't want to do is imply that that is healthy or normal or acceptable. If you're going to put people in your story that are shitty relationship-wise, that don't respect agency and authority, or not authority, agency and autonomy, that don't respect each other, that do a lot of really unhealthy shit, you need to establish that that is bad. That person is doing something wrong and should not be rewarded for it, should not be, given any sort of blessing in that regard. And speaking of rewards, this shouldn't need to be said, but I'm going to say it anyway. Just bear in mind that getting a romantic partner is not a reward, and it should not be a reward in stories. There should be no, oh my gosh, you stormed the castle and slayed the dragon, you get the princess. No, people are not rewards. That is not the point. And I will die on that fucking hill. I am not there for sexy lamps, as they're called. Like, nobody gets a sexy lamp in my universes. It doesn't work that way. So, anyway, good morning, Firehawk. So, writing healthy relationships. Again, part of it is reading stuff out loud, making sure that the dialogue flows, makes sense. A thing to remember about dialogue is it's going to take you a whole lot longer to write it than it is for someone to read it. Every time. It's amazing to me. You can spend hours on a few pages of dialogue, and when you come back and read it, it takes you like, a minute, 30 seconds. And you're like, where did all that work go? It's like, it's there. But the speed at which people cruise through dialogue when they're reading it is a lot faster than it takes you to generate it. And also, people that write dialogue have a bad habit of skipping important things because they're in a hurry to get to the good stuff. They skip the establishing parts of the conversation. They skip the pleasantries. They skip really anything leading up to the stuff that matters because they want to get to the stuff that matters. But that creates a very jarring conversation. So you have to take your time with dialogue. Don't rush it. Know that it's going to take you a while, and know that once you're done, even if you're like, wow, that was 5 pages of dialogue, it's not going to take anybody that long to read that. 5 pages of dialogue goes really fucking fast when you're just reading it. So bear that in mind. Dialogue can be a slog because you're writing people speaking, but you're also working in little descriptions, you're working in little context clues, facial expressions, things like that. Hopefully at a good balance. So yeah, be patient with dialogue. Please, 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 please. It took an hour to write. I thought it would take an hour to read. Yeah. Legit. And yes, no sexy lamps, not even you, Muffed, I'm sorry. Muffed, you are worth so much more than just a prize to be won. Come on. You have so much more value than that. No buts. No. Okay, so the way I do it, and again, your mileage may vary. If you like to write wish fulfillment stuff that doesn't necessarily have a basis for where it came from, go for it. People do like and consume that content. That is fine. And like I said, I know I shoot myself in the foot by not creating it. But I have established my brand now, and there's no going back. We've been doing this for nearly 4 years, you guys. I started the channel in September of 2019. We've been at this a bit. So that's a good point, Halo. Be a sexy lamp all you want. Just don't be a prize. Yeah. Sexy lamps are great. I mean, the lamp aspect is kind of a bummer, but maybe sexy multi-tool or something. You can do a lot of cool stuff. Sexy lamp Christmas story. Yeah, basically that. It's a prize. It is a prize to be looked at and touched and admired, and it doesn't really do anything. That's exactly the point. It's a major award, and your characters should never be major awards. All right, I think we've established that. So, in my stories, in the audios that I do, I'm going to focus specifically on friends to lovers here, but, just because that tends to be where the relationship building and rapid development comes in. Because most of my series that have relationships have been more of a slow burn, like the Elf Bandit. Elf Bandit was a slow burn. And my character in that story worked very hard to her own ends. She had goals of her own, she had ambitions of her own, and she achieved those. She worked her ass off and she achieved those. What she likes about the main character has nothing at all to do with their wealth, with their power, anything like that. I feel like, again, that's important. I try to model these healthy relationships in very small ways, anywhere that I can. But she has agency, she has interests outside of the main character. She has personality, honestly. Like, her existence does not revolve around the main character, around the listener's character. What she says and does in her life is unrelated to the listener until they get back together and start working together to try and, overthrow all the court intrigue and stuff like that. Her ability to function and enjoy her life is not predicated upon the presence of the listener. It's not required. She's doing fine, she's having a good life. And this is just one example of where I try to actively avoid. Yeah, they've shared a journey. Exactly. That's what I'm talking about. Writing natural relationship dynamics is exactly what I'm talking about. I try to actively avoid codependency in my storytelling, because codependency is one of those things that it's very easy to fall into the trap of, especially for people that don't have a lot of relationship experience or had bad relationship models when they were growing up, which a lot of us did. My parents were pretty codependent for a lot of my childhood, and that's not a great way to be. Codependency is... There's a lot of aspects to it, but the ones that stand out to me the most are feeling like you need to be with somebody, feeling like you're the only person that can make that person happy to a certain extent, feeling like you're the only one that can fix it if they are hurting, if they are struggling, that you have this unique perspective that borders on possession, that it's an unhealthy entanglement of your lives together. And that's why it's called codependency. It's not a healthy vibe. One rule of thumb when I'm writing relationships that I recommend you circle back to is that your characters should never need to be together. That should never be a need. They should want to be together. If they're choosing each other, it should have nothing to do with, I can't live without you, because that is unhealthy as fuck and super codependent. It should be, I like being around you. Being around you makes me feel good, makes me feel better, makes me feel stronger. We lift each other up, we support each other, we help each other. We could easily live without each other. That's not a problem, but I think I would be happier with you. I am choosing to be with you. I like myself more when I am with you. Things like that. It's an assessment of the situation and the dynamic within the relationship and going, sure, I could live without this, but I think I'd rather live with it. This is what I want. Don't need it, just want it. So that's that vibe. So definitely, if you ever are tempted when you're telling a story to use the phrase, I can't live without you, please don't. I beg you. Let's retire that from the relationship writing lexicon, please. Please. Please never say I can't live without you. Because, that activates every red flag in my brain. It is bad. And again, I get that the yandere vibe is a thing. I feel like, and I've said this before, I feel like the people that super enjoy yandere for escapism are the ones who have never actually, been stalked or harassed or anything like that in a way that has left any lasting damage. Unless it's one of those things where they're using that as a way to retain some control over a situation that they themselves have experienced. But yandere is basically based on one person saying, I know what's best for you. I know you better than anybody. I love you better than anybody ever will. I'm going to possess you and take care of you and make sure that nothing ever hurts you. I get to decide what that means. I get to decide what that looks like. You don't have any agency in this situation. I need you. And everything about what I just said makes my skin crawl. Can't do it. Cannot do it. Codependency is based on abuse. It is not always based on abuse. It is sometimes based on abuse. But codependency is one of those things that is surprisingly easy to fall into in just a regular relationship setting. If you are hungry for affection, if you're hungry for validation, if you were a kid whose parents were not great models of behavior. My parents were not neglectful of me at all, but they did not have a great dynamic that they modeled for me. My mother was the chief of multi-day silent treatments. My father was the master of passive-aggressive behavior. And that's not, I don't necessarily lump those in with abuse. They're certainly not great, but yeah, being lonely and wanting company can lead you into places where, especially if you feel like nobody else understands you. If you're, a lonely, awkward kid who's reaching out, who media is telling constantly, you need to be loved, you need to be validated, you need somebody to care about you or you are worthless, and you just want somebody to care about you, it can be very easy to fall into those roles where you become intertwined and you think you possess that person on some level. And it's not usually a conscious thing. You're not trying to own some other person, but you think, well, I know them better than anybody, and I love them more than anybody ever could. And I don't know what I'll do if they leave me. I can't handle it if they leave me. I'll die. I'll die if they leave me. I need them. And it's really, really easy to end up in that space. Now, of course, there's nothing wrong with being lonely and wanting company. That is just a state that people enter into. A lot of people enter into. We are social creatures. We are not meant to live in isolation. It's not something most of us are very good at. I'm not saying that that is the problem. I'm saying that is the gateway for a lot of people into getting into unhealthy relationships. It's not because all of us were abused. It's because we want to be loved. And we want to feel like the person we love loves us, and we want to have that sort of magical, special, unique relationship that you hear about in stories and see in movies where it's different. What we have is different from what other people have. That sort of thing. It is reinforced by our society, by our media, but at the end of the day, codependency is remarkably common. It is. Once you start realizing that it's there, you start seeing it everywhere. It is unsettlingly common. And I mean, even to this day, like even as aware of it as I am, I will realize sometimes that my head and my heart don't necessarily align. I will have feelings about things that my head can go, all right, that's codependency. Slow the fuck down. Doesn't change how it feels. It's just checking myself, but it's there. Codependency is traced back to you. I'm sorry, Wolf, do you genuinely believe that all codependency goes back to an alcoholic in the family? Genuinely. I'm asking this as a legitimate question. Because I am 100% here to tell you that is not true. Hard to say. You literally just said codependency is traced back to an alcoholic in the family. Unless you're speaking specifically of your family, or unless you have a degree in psychology. maybe perhaps consider that there are other causes for codependency. There are no alcoholics in my family, and my parents were ragingly codependent. I'm not sure what you're talking about when you said I asked it all. I'm explaining what codependency is and how easy it is for people of all walks of life and at all stages of life to fall into that space because of a need to be wanted, needed, and cared for. Because people are frequently lonely. And codependency is insidious. And it also doesn't have to be ragingly yandere. There's a spectrum of codependency, just like there's a spectrum of most things. But no, it is not all tied to alcoholism. God, no. I'm sure there is a trend there. I'm sure that families with alcoholics have a pattern of codependency because, like many people with substance abuse issues, alcoholics require care. They require care, they don't necessarily function properly in given situations, and there becomes an issue of, I love this person, but they are damaged. But I can fix them, I can save them, I can protect them from the world. That is absolutely one of many things that can cause codependency. It's not the only one. And yes, we are social animals. So yes, substance abuse issues in families can increase the chances of things like this, both among couples themselves and also for modeling that behavior for children and things like that. That is an issue. And I don't mean to get into the weeds on where codependency comes from, but I do insist that if you are going to make a claim in the chat, that you will cite sources. 2 months sobriety, yay! Muffed, you are my hero. Genuinely, I'm so proud of you. I cannot say it enough. Oh, that warms my heart. I love it. You're gonna make me cry. Vod's like, I have access to the happy gas mask noises, and by God, I'm going to use it. Facing codependence by, okay, so you've got one source that talks about alcoholism and codependency. That's great. And like I said, I'm sure that absolutely is the case. For people with alcoholics in the family, codependency is definitely an issue. But it is not the only case in which codependency arises. You don't have to have an alcoholic in your family to have codependency be a thing for you at all. It's one of those things where this, but not necessarily this. Correlation does not necessarily equal causation. And the one does not have to be present to create the other. It can increase the chances of the other. There are people that grew up in alcoholic families who are not codependent, and there are people who grew up in non-alcoholic families who are codependent. But I'm sure there is an increased risk. Just like there's an increased risk of a lot of things when you grow up in an alcoholic family or a family with other substance abuse issues, of which there are many. Or families with other sorts of abuse issues. Emotional abuse, psychological abuse, physical abuse. These are all things that create a ridiculous amount of problems for people down the road. So yes. Okay, circling back around to the actual writing of these things. I'm also not a huge fan of the words forever and always, or even never, for that matter. I don't like extremes. And part of this is some of my legal background. I have a lot of experience with the legal system, and speaking in extremes rarely works out well. But even in relationships, the number of people that I've known who would cry at the end of a relationship saying something like, he promised he'd love me forever. I mean, we make those promises with the best of intentions. We always do. But forever is a long time. And as much as it makes for a pretty story, and it does, as much as it makes for a pretty escapist audio to say this person will love you forever, my brain just goes, eh? Hi, Lucas, welcome. Yeah, my brain can't really wrap itself around forever because in the real world, it just doesn't often go that way. And I've said this before, but I'll say it again. It's been a while. I remember hearing once that a successful relationship, the most successful relationship you can have, is one in which one of you will watch the other die. And the implication is it's because you have lived to a ripe old age and one of you just outlives the other. And that's how the end of your relationship goes. It's not because one of you leaves the other, it's because one of you dies. But that's dark as fuck to think about, you know? It's really dark to think about. Like, the pinnacle of successful relationship is one in which one of you dies at the end before you've had a chance to split up because you've been together so long. Yeah. Forever, always, and never are tough words. Yeah. I mean, and we do throw them around. We throw them around pretty freely for a lot of things like, oh, I will never eat that. That's gross. Or, oh, I will always love this. That's amazing. But when it comes to people, I think the issue is that when people say, I will love you forever, if someone says that to you, it's important as a listener in that situation to understand the framing of that comment. When people say it, they mean it in that moment. They mean it, they intend, the intentions are there. They intend to make this work. They intend to care forever. Mages. There you go. And if someone were to say that to me, you know, oh my gosh, I'll love you forever. As great as it would be to hear, there is a part of my brain that would click and go, they mean that right now. And hopefully with some effort and time and stuff, we can make that a reality. We can make this go until one of us kicks the bucket in our 90s, you know, way up there. Because we have to hear it that way. We have to, when someone uses those extremes for us, we have to reframe that in our brains appropriately, because otherwise we're just setting ourselves up for disappointment. And I've been guilty of that too. I've had breakups where, like, I hear what they're saying, that they don't want to be together anymore, they don't feel about me like they used to, blah, blah. And there's this tiny voice in my head going, but you said you'd love me forever. And it's like, we know logically that forever isn't a thing. We know it. We can be well aware of that, and yet still our hearts want so badly for it to be real. We want so badly for that to be the case. Shove brain into computer. Yeah, relationships are definitely not easy, and that's one of the reasons why with my friends to lovers, at the end they do get together, because that's what a friends to lovers is. Hi, Kalana. But I never say we're going to be together forever, or this is amazing, it's never going to stop kind of thing. My friends to lovers almost always end with some variation of, let's just see how this goes. Hydrate. Thank you. Took a sip of last night's Diet Coke. That was a mistake. Don't recommend. So, 300 years from now? If you're Mormon, what you say is, for time and all eternity. And boy, do they mean that shit. God damn. Yeah, we're not going to touch on the cult aspects of forever and always. Shut up, Halo. I see you. Anyway, so yeah, and the end of my friends to lovers audios are usually some variation of, let's just see how this goes. It's, I like this thing. I like what we are together. I like this next evolution of our relationship. I think we should see how it plays out. And I feel like that's a healthy, and that's not to say that relationships shouldn't have commitment, because of course they should. If you care about somebody at that level and you intend to try your best to make it work, and your heart is saying forever, even if you know your head is, kiboshing that, but you want it to be forever. You really do. How you feel about this person right now is strong and powerful, and you love them and you want it to work. And you're going to work on it. Like, that's fine. That's commitment. Like, you can commit to somebody and be like, I'm going to do the best I can to make this work. Maybe it won't. Maybe it won't work out. But we are a team. We are in this together. We're going forward together. Let's see if we can stay on the same path and build this life together. The paths might diverge at some point. But if we work at it, if we try to stay on the same path, We might just get there. And that's fine. That's absolutely fine. That's the commitment side. Commitment is work. Committing to somebody else is actual work. You have to make that decision every day when you wake up that this is the person that I care about and I'm going to keep working at this. Because I feel like love is a motivation, but commitment is a discipline. You know? Where motivation fails, discipline kicks in. And again, qualifying this to say, you should not stay in unhealthy relationships. Relationships do fail all the time. Like constantly. All of us have experienced failed relationships. Either you grow apart, or one person turns out to not be the person you thought they were, or feelings just change over time, or your goals and values change. Suddenly you're on different paths and you look around and go, wait, what are you doing over there? Like it happens. It 100% happens. And you shouldn't force yourself to stay in a situation. And this is going to vary case by case, obviously. Like how much work to put into a relationship, how much effort to put in before it becomes time to say this isn't working anymore. That's a case by case thing, and that depends on you. That said, making the decision to be with somebody, making the choice to be with somebody, especially when you've entwined your lives, when you share property, or you're married, or you have kids together, or something like that, you make the choice that you're at least going to make the effort, that the feelings you have about this person are still strong, even if they have evolved over time. Maybe that new relationship energy is worn off, but it's settled into something a little more steady, a little more constant, a little more comfortable. Comfortable is good. Because as fun as new relationship energy is, there's really something to be said for feeling safe and comfortable. You know, that is structure, that is stability, that is warmth, that is very hard to get until you've worked to get yourself to that point. You know, it's not as thrilling, but it doesn't have to be. It's different in a good way. And you make the decision to keep trying to make that work. And if you're constantly fighting, or one person's being actively abusive or something like that, obviously it's not going to work. But because of how you feel and because of how you care, you make the commitment to at least trying. That is where the commitment lies. And that's why at the end of the Friends to Lovers audios, I end with, let's see where this goes, because that is the commitment in that scenario. We have established that these two characters have these feelings, that these feelings exist, maybe have existed for a while, that they agree that they want to see how it shakes out. They want to try and see if they can be a couple, and let's see how that goes. That is the commitment. They are committing to trying. Doesn't mean it's going to go anywhere, but they are committing to trying. And that is about as wish-fulfilling as I'm able to get in my audios. And I realize that that's, again, not all that wish-fulfilling. But, yeah. You'll always make puns. Salt Lake City. Ugh, more like Provo. Yeah, being comfy with someone is... I had a friend who, she and her significant other partied a lot and went out a lot and fought a lot, and they would yell and scream, and then they got married. And on their honeymoon, they had a massive fight, and he smashed a glass top coffee table over the course of this fight. He smashed it. And then they made up, and I guess everything was fine. And I remember thinking, how can it be stable with that kind of drama? How can it be? And they were both guilty of it. They were both guilty of viciously pushing each other's buttons and raising their voices, and just, it felt like they were in it for the wrong reasons. I guess, you know, it felt like they were in it for the romantic ideal of being with this other person and the thrill and the passion, and not for trying to make something work that was remotely stable or healthy. And it was terrifying. And them not huge red flags. Yeah, people that thrive off drama, I feel like, just haven't experienced enough drama in their life to get to the point where it's like, oh my God, that's enough. Because, yeah. Angst and drama, not a great look. In the end, they did get divorced, They were not married very long. I'll be honest. They got divorced. And I never really spoke to her about that dynamic and how unhealthy it seemed from the outside. I'm hoping that she took from that some lessons. I haven't actually talked to her in a while, but I plan to call her today, actually. So maybe I'll check in on her. Hello, Dave. And Ohio boy, hello. Core of a relationship need to be friendship. Yeah, I feel like in order to write the healthiest of relationship dynamics, you have to remember that these are two people with their own agency and their own personalities, and they matter. And they will interact with each other, but they will not be dependent on each other for interaction. And that they should have a pleasant friendship dynamic beyond what's romantic. Vod, thank you for the gift sub. So yeah, it's not to say that every relationship needs to have a foundation of friendship, but because I know some people just meet and, you know, start dating and stuff before they've had time to really get to know each other as friends. But getting to know each other as friends should be part of that process as you are with somebody, as you are learning to operate in their orbit and, you know, become that binary star system that you've always wanted to be. It's important to be friendly, be kind, be nice, have that comfortable dynamic and encourage it, foster that, because that is where the comfort comes from. Getting to know somebody on a level that maybe you do know them better than anyone at this point. Doesn't mean that other people in their life don't contribute or don't make their lives richer. Doesn't mean that other people in your life don't contribute or make their lives richer. You have interests and desires and friends and stuff outside of the partner, and that is exactly how it should be. No one's life should revolve around the others. But you can go forward together with complementary lifestyles. That is what I try to get at with my relationship dynamics. The same with the Elf Bandit. She has a life. She has a good life that she's worked hard for. And she wasn't about to let, you know, some weird royal coup interfere too much with her path. That said, now she's a little bored and, you know, wants to hang out with her friend. And in the course of doing that, stuff started to unfold a little bit. You start to realize, hey, this person's actually pretty awesome and I feel things when I'm around them. But even then, the slow burn, to me, is so important. I think it makes the actual getting together at the end way more satisfying. So much more satisfying than if you just throw them together in the first 8 minutes and go, there you go, you got a partner now. Like, as a writer, the slow burn is hard. It's really hard because you want to get to the good stuff, like in the worst way, you really do. But you have to take your time and build that framework around them. Build the reasons why anybody should give a shit. Why should people care about these two? Why should people care? Even if they're immersed in it, even if the listener is a character, who cares? Why? Why does anybody give a shit about these characters? Give me some meat to work with. Give me some flesh on the bones. And then unspool that relationship and let them develop in an organic and natural fashion. And even then, at the end of the day, it's still not an always or forever situation necessarily. But they can try. They can try to get there. Ohio boy with the goober redeem. Hello, Ohio boy. Glad you made it. Delightful goober, Midwestern goober. Okay, sorry, I'm looking at the chat real quick. Slow burn script. Yeah, slow burns are, God, they're satisfying. And it's interesting because the same goes for most media. You know, you watch a TV show where there's a lot of will they or won't they tension. And it's kind of a joke. It's a trope at this point with the will they or won't they stuff. But generally speaking, when the will they or won't they couple gets together, the show stops being as good, you know? because as much as in an actual relationship you want that comfort and stability and structure and reassurance that the other person is in it for the same reasons that you are and is putting the same level of effort in and is committed the same way you are, that's not as interesting to watch. The will they or won't they is more interesting to watch. So there's a difference between writing a healthy relationship dynamic and experiencing one, which is fine. That's totally fine. And it can be both. And I find that the shows that do the best after characters get together are the ensemble cast ones. The ones where there are so many other characters who have things going on that are interesting, that you're not focused on just the breeding pair. You're focused on this whole group. And it doesn't really shake it up too much to have this thing play out, which is good. Met your wife when she was going to college and you were a groundskeeper. Aw, that's adorable. See, that right there is a great meet cute. We were talking about meet cutes earlier. That is a great meet cute. A college student and the groundskeeper talking about flowers. Look at that. Love that. Yeah, that slow drift and then the holy shit, I just realized I really care. And the fun of it is, if you're writing a story, god damn it, fingies, stop that. If you're writing a story, you can incorporate, if you want to, depending on how important your romantic plot is to your overall plot, you can incorporate that into the climax of your story. You can have one character realize that they care about somebody because that person's life is in danger, and they have that realization of, oh my god, I have to do something. Like, I have to do something. That moment of clarity can be a really great storytelling device. It really can. Love that shit. But again, try to avoid sexy lamp territory. Give your characters some agency, give them some personality. I'm a big fan of equal partners, which again does not play into that wish fulfillment damsel in distress trope, and I know that that's not helping me, but I like my characters to be on equal footing. I like them each to have something to offer, like post-apocalyptic scavenger. She's been surviving on that planet on her own for a really long time. She rescues the listener out of the pod, catches him up on what's going on, but the listener contributes too. The listener has engineering knowledge and information, and they can work together. The listener is the reason why she finally gets off the planet. So that sort of give and take and mutual contribution, I really like that. I think that everybody's got something to offer, everybody's got something to contribute in a relationship and out of it. So the fingies want to slap her. Ah! Exchanging insurance info after an accident. Another cute one. See? What are my thoughts on caregiver relationships? Are you speaking of like the kind that develop romantically, or just a caregiver with somebody who requires care? Because we are talking about multiple relationships here. I know I keep circling back to romantic stuff, but that's because that's what the majority of relationship stuff in media is. But obviously we do have the friendship stuff. We have the Bilbo and the dwarves. Those are all important. Parent and child relationships. Yeah. I'm a sucker for those. I woke up this morning and realized if this person weren't in my life, I'd be really sad. Yeah, I like those too. I think that people are capable of moments of clarity. I think that's not bad writing to do that. I think that's great. I think a lot of us have had moments like that. Usually there is some sort of catalyst. Something happens that makes us go, oh, hey, wait a second. Maybe the person says they're leaving to go away to college, or maybe they just get out of a relationship with somebody that hurt them, and you're like, wow, I want to beat the shit out of the person that hurt you. Why do I feel so strongly about this? Like things like that. Yeah, the existing friendship is required in order for that framework to play out. But yes, it isn't. But it's a slow burn. It's a gentle sort of sliding from one kind of relationship into a slightly evolved kind of relationship, and you just sort of slip into it. It's like a gentle, zero entry pool sort of thing. Whatever seems to fit this topic better. Okay, so for me with caregiver relationships, I don't like to mix caregiver with romantic because I have a thing about power dynamics. And I was just talking about this when I talked about the characters being equal partners. It's the same reason that in general I don't do audios where one person is the boss and the other person is the subordinate and they get together romantically. Like, it happens, like the evil henchman one happens, but it has to be very carefully controlled. Like that one was more of like a Tony Stark Pepper Potts thing, where yes, technically one is employed by the other, but that is not their dynamic. Their dynamic is much more equal footing, much more, shared responsibility, shared power. If it was a more traditional, office worker with manager or something like that, I can't do that, because power dynamics to me are not a place in which romantic relationships should be pursued. There's a lot that can go wrong there. There's a lot that could be unhealthy there. And in my mind, there's just sort of always that question of, even just on a subconscious level, how much of this stems from that power dynamic and how much of it is just natural? How much does someone feel compelled to pursue a relationship because the person that is pursuing them has a level of power over them, even slightly? Teacher students, another one I'm not a big fan of for just that reason. I know it happens. I know it can happen in a healthy way. But for me, for my comfort level and for writing audios, and again, trying to tell stories that will further a healthy perspective on relationships in general, I try to avoid things like that are potentially more problematic or might potentially model something that is less than sustainable in real life. So, yeah. Hey, Cheese, welcome. Relationships with the people you work with are hard. Yeah, it's like the saying goes, don't shit where you eat. Generally speaking, you probably shouldn't have relationships with people that you work with. And that goes for, writing them too. It's not to say it doesn't work out, because of course it can. But the potential for trouble is much, much higher. As we talked earlier about, certain scenarios will increase the chances of bad outcomes, like with the alcoholism and the codependency. You are increasing chances of bad outcomes by shitting where you eat, as the saying goes. It is not ideal. And the same goes for, like in my case, creators and communities. I am never super comfortable with creators who get together with people in their communities, especially if it happens like multiple times. It feels, I don't know, it doesn't feel great to me. Again, not to say it can't happen or it can't happen in a healthy way, but it just, yeah, there is potential there for some not great outcomes, and best to avoid where possible. Weird can be good, but in a general sense, and everybody's got their own standards, their own values, I suppose, their own boundaries that they erect for themselves relationship-wise. If you say, I would never date a smoker, if you say I would never date somebody at work, I would never, whatever. Those are your parameters, those are yours to keep. You do what you want with them. For me, it's things like power dynamics, and even in a community, you can have power dynamic issues, because say, it's a creator who's got a large community, and there are people in that community who could benefit from their association with that creator. They could benefit from clout or something like that. It's not to say that that's what they're there for, not necessarily, but there is an element of power exchange there that is potentially problematic. And also there's a vulnerability issue. And this is something that I personally deal with. I have trust issues with people. Very, very strong trust issues with people. I've had my privacy violated. I've been stalked in real life. I've experienced codependent relationships. I've experienced abusive relationships. I know how a lot of that stuff feels, and I've had people turn up years later when I thought they were long gone just turning up in my DMs, or in one case, LinkedIn, which is such a strange choice. I still can't wrap my brain around that. But anyway, so I'm familiar with a lot of unpleasant situations, and for that reason, and not just that, but also situations in which somebody, used the word forever and then didn't mean it, or used the word forever and then didn't genuinely have your best interests at heart, or said they loved you but didn't actually do much to look after you or take care of you or help you or contribute or ask about your day or check in on your feelings or anything like that. The sort of things that we sort of assume are standard when you genuinely care about somebody. So I've definitely experienced a lot of those things, and for that reason I am very slow to trust people. So I realize that some of what I'm saying is coming from a place of that low trust level. That said, it is difficult for me to imagine a situation in which I would be super comfortable pursuing a romantic situation with somebody that they could potentially hurt me. Like when you are with somebody, and this is always the case, when you're with somebody and you become vulnerable to them, you allow yourself to be vulnerable to them, you give them a lot of power. You grant that to that person because you want to trust them and you want to believe that they will not hurt you. And most of the time that's okay. Most of the time that's fine. And even if you go your separate ways, nobody is hostile enough to, burn the world down. Nobody's hostile enough to take what they know about you and use it as ammunition. That said, I've seen that happen enough times to people that it does genuinely scare me. The thought of giving somebody access to myself at that level is very scary. And I do struggle to trust. There's only a handful of people that I trust implicitly. And it has, it's been a lot of work to get to that point. And I appreciate those people very, very much, because they have not let me down in that regard. And it's valuable. But yeah, it is difficult to put yourself in a position where you're taking a leap of faith. All relationships to an extent are a leap of faith. You are jumping out there and hoping that the other person's going to catch you and not drop you, or worse, pile drive you into the ground. And even if things change, even if things don't work out, you're hopeful that that person will not actively go out of their way to hurt you. And there are plenty of people that stay in bad situations because they are worried about the fallout, because the person they are with is abusive and manipulative and doesn't respect boundaries, and they are concerned that if they try to leave that person, they are going to be hurt in some way, even if it's long distance, even if it's online only, tweaking chat records or releasing pictures or stuff like that. Like, there are so many ways that people can hurt each other after a relationship or in a relationship. So, trust is key. And it's another reason I'm a big fan of the slow burn in real life and in stories, because it takes a lot of work to build that sort of trust. And I realize some people trust very quickly. And I don't know what I think about that. I don't know how I feel about trusting people super quickly, because I feel like it is a recipe for potential disaster. But if it hasn't backfired on you and you're that kind of person, then you know what? More power to you, I guess. You've made better choices than I have. But, yeah, opening up slowly. I mean, you can always open up a little more. If you take it slow, you can always add a little more of yourself, share a little more of yourself. But you can't put that genie back in the bottle once it's out. I've known people that just, because of their trauma, because of their experiences, when they would meet a new person that they felt remotely connected to, would just dump all of themselves on this other person, all the deep dark secrets, all the quirks, the foibles, the personality things, all of it, would just put it all out there. And I would be like, what are you doing? You just handed that person the entirety of you. That is potential ammunition. At least make them work for it. At least make them earn it by showing you that they can be trusted, that, let them earn the trust. Because it's something that should be earned, just like respect. Trust and respect should be earned. And once broken, are really, really, really hard to get back. And in my case, I really can't think of many cases in which someone broke my trust and I ended up being able to be close to that person again. I'm not sure it's ever happened. Because once broken, it's broken. You know, you can't fix that. Some of us trust quickly because you're dying for, yeah, exactly. Like I know there are reasons for trusting quickly, and that's like what we talked about earlier with people jumping into relationships quickly and even falling into codependency. But yes, it does lead to rejection, and it can also lead to an unhealthy vulnerability. And again, I'm not trying to yuck anybody's yum or to say that anybody's doing it better or worse than I do, because I realize that I err on the side of being extremely slow to open up to people. But I'm a big fan of putting yourself first from an emotional support standpoint, and that frequently means protecting yourself, I guess is the way to put it. Protect yourself and your heart until somebody has earned the right to be there. And what that means is going to vary from person to person. Your standards are going to vary. But hey, thank you for the follow. Yeah, and when it does work out, you do have a new ride or die. That is true. That is amazing. When you make friends, connections, relationships that stick like that, that is outstanding. And also, again, I've spoken about this before, but keep in mind that there are different relationships for different stages of your life. The people that you are friends with when you are 9 years old are not necessarily going to be the people you're friends with when you are 16 or 25 or whatever. Friendships and relationships come and go throughout our lives. Life is made of meetings and partings. And that's okay. That is how we evolve. That is how we change. Because if you are the same person at 25 that you were when you were 9, there is a problem. Like, you have not grown. You have stagnated in your character arc. So, and yes, you may carry a few forward. Like Vod says, they will have changed. If people are on the same path as you, and this is how long-term relationships manage to last, is because you're on the same path as somebody else. And even though you are changing and evolving, they are changing and evolving along with you in the same direction. That is kind of the best anybody can hope for, is that the people on the path with you are going the same way you are. And as you change, you continue to be compatible through those changes. The person that you are now is still compatible with the person that they are now, just like you were back in the day for different reasons. And again, that takes effort, that takes work, that takes checking in, temperature checks on the relationship, temperature checks on people's goals and values and things like that. Being very cognizant of who you are and what you're in it for and what your goals are and things like that. And looking around and realizing, making sure that the people that you surround yourself with are the people that make you feel the best about yourself, the best about your situation, the best in general. Like, surround yourself with people that make you feel like the best version of yourself, make you feel stronger, lift you up, make you feel safe. God, that's a big one. Make you feel cared for, make you feel appreciated, make you feel validated. These are the people that matter. And you know when that's not the case. Your gut tells you very frequently when that's not the case. We override our guts a lot, which is really a shame. But being honest with yourself about, and this, I think everybody's had this experience, where you're friends with somebody forever, and you don't even talk that much, but you've known them forever, and you feel like you sort of owe it to them to keep being friends with them because you've known them for so long, and you used to have a lot in common, and now you really don't. And then you look around and go, I don't really know this person anymore, you know? Or worse, they've become somebody that you don't like, that their personality has changed to the point where you're no longer compatible. And that's hard. It's hard to look around and go, I don't think I want to be friends with this person anymore. This person no longer is a good fit for me. So, yeah, it's a hard thing to do, but when those times come, you have to kind of be true to yourself. Again, protect yourself. Don't light yourself on fire to keep them warm. Don't put up with shit that makes you uncomfortable or unhappy, even a little bit, just because you feel like you owe somebody because you've known them forever or something. As you move through the stages of your life, the people that go with you are going to be a pretty small number. You'll pick up some new ones every stage and take them with you, and then they may fall off, they may not. People from way back in the day may stick with you, they may not. But it is way better to sort of gradually let a relationship peter out than it is to brute force it with somebody that you no longer have anything in common with and maybe don't actually have that much fun being around. And I'm not going to tell the story again about the time that happened to me, but like I think we've all had an experience where you're hanging out with somebody that you've known forever and you're like, I'm not actually having fun right now. This isn't fun for me. So, yeah. And it's important to reassess and recheck. And honestly, it's about prioritizing yourself, which is really hard for a lot of us to do. But I've talked lately about how finite a resource time is. Time is something we cannot get back. And the time we spend with people needs to matter. And it doesn't always have to be big, heavy, amazing time. Like you can just vibe next to somebody on the couch and have a great time. That's not a big deal. I'm talking about putting time and effort into relationships and encounters with people that add nothing to your life or actively make you uncomfortable or unhappy, even just a little bit, even if you're just sitting there going, kind of wish I was doing something else right now. Like, if that's the case, do it. Do something else with your time. It is your time. You're at the best fit because those guys were there for me and I've been there for them. And that's important. Obviously, if someone has been there for you and you've been there for them, that is important. But that doesn't change the fact that who you are and who they are may at some point become incompatible. Ride or die is important. And I'm a big fan of the people in my life that are ride or die, and they know who they are, like 100%. But that doesn't absolve you of the need to occasionally check in with yourself and with them to make sure that you are ride or die with people that are still the sort of people you want to be that close to. Have they changed? Have they evolved into a different space? Have they gone off on a different path? It's important. And I feel like for a lot of people, the whole, well, I've known them forever and they've been there for me, so I owe it to them, is very motivating. It is. When you feel like you owe somebody, it is incredibly motivating. Well, they were there for me through the worst of it, and I couldn't have gotten through it without them, so I owe it to them. And yeah, to a certain extent, that's fine. We do owe things to each other. That is how society works. But there is no counter running about paying those debts. You know, at some point, if you've owed it to somebody for a long time to give them your time and resources, and it stops being valuable to you, and it starts to feel like a chore or just not a good time anymore, and you're starting to get resentful of it, that's not a healthy situation, and it's probably best to exit that situation. So yeah, it is absolutely your life, and you have to make your own choices for what's healthy and what's not. And that's going to change. You're not always going to get it right. And again, who you are today is not who you're going to be in 5 years or 10 years or 20 years. That's a different person. All you can hope for is that the people that you're on the path with now are going to grow in the same direction as you, that you are growing together. And that is what we try to do as friends and in relationships, is to encourage each other and support each other to grow in the same direction. If everybody's working together, if everybody's on the same path, that path should get wider, not narrower. There should be room for more on the path. You should be able to make room for your friends, and they can make room for you, and everybody's still going in the same direction and actively working to be as healthy as possible, because this is ultimately what healthy relationships come down to. You need to do the work. You need to not abdicate your responsibility in a relationship for your part in it. If you are in a relationship, whether it's romantic, whether it's family, whether it's friends, doesn't matter, even work coworkers, whatever the relationship is, you have a role in that. You have chosen to be engaged with another person in a certain way, within a certain framework, following certain parameters. And you have a responsibility in that framework to behave a certain way, to be a certain amount of available, because you have agreed to, it's a social contract. You have agreed to participate in this relationship. And that's going to vary a lot between relationships, how much participation is required. When it comes to romantic relationships, I like to use the 60% rule. And I have talked about this before, but it's been a minute. In my mind, if two people are in a romantic relationship together, they should both be trying to give 60%. At least. The point of that is that nobody's just aiming for halfway. Because if you're aiming to give the bare minimum in a equal parts relationship, that would be half. If that is your aim, that's not great. You are basically trying to do as little as possible. Aiming for 60% suggests that you are in it to make an effort, but you are not aiming for like 90% where you plan to just put yourself aside and focus entirely on that person to the most unhealthy of ends. You still have agency, you still have a presence that needs to be acknowledged and respected and things like that. So, but the other thing about the 60% rule is that it makes it easier for one person to step up if the other person is struggling. Because we all have good days and bad days. There will be days when one partner in the relationship is having just a really shit day. And if the other person's already on board for 60%, it's not that difficult to up that a little bit and, reach in and help that person. And the same goes the other way around. If you're in it for 60%, but the best you can do is 40 that day because you're having just a shit day, the other person can step up. And it shouldn't always be one person stepping up, obviously. Like, that's an imbalance. And you want to try for a balance as much as possible. But you also don't want to keep score. There is no score. It's not one of those, well, you had 2 bad days last week and I just had 1, so it's my turn. You get to look after me. That's not how it works. If you make your relationships transactional, you have lost. If you keep score, you have lost. But again, both people in the group have to be, and again, we're speaking of breeding pairs, basically, pair bonds and relationships and romantic. Both people need to be in it to give that 60% and to do their best to make it work. That is what, again, that's what commitment is both people agreeing to keep trying, to keep making that decision every day to try. Whether it works out or not, they've at least agreed that they are both on board. That is the commitment. So, yeah, Dave, exactly. That's very common. Friendships that just sort of fall out because you're like, I don't really know this person anymore. So yeah, the 60% rule is I think a great rule of thumb for relationships in general, so that both people are giving more than they have to, but they don't necessarily have to in that situation. Like, they're willing. It's a willingness thing. Are you willing to give a little extra if your partner needs it, knowing that they will do the same for you? Again, that is the contract. You're not a doormat. You don't just lay down and let them walk all over you. And likewise, they don't just lay down and you don't walk all over them. Because there is, in every relationship, a slight power exchange day to day. I'm not talking about like the power dynamics we talked about earlier. I'm talking about small things. And it should never be something that is weaponized. You should never be keeping score. You should never be dragging that shit out when you fight. And honestly, and this probably makes me in the minority, but I'm not a fan of fighting. I don't think fighting accomplishes anything. I think what fighting does is give people an opportunity to hurt each other. I don't even like raising my voice unless if I get super emotional, I might, but even then I feel really bad about it. So in my mind, the role that a fight plays in a relationship for me is best served by a conversation. Like, you sit down, you talk things out, you go into it. It might get heated, but you go into it with the intent of solving the problem. It is you and your partner against the problem. And to me, fighting is your partner against you. And that's the difference. If you approach it as you and your partner against the problem, there shouldn't be a fight, because the conflict is not between the two of you. It is between you and the problem. And you will solve it. You will sit down and you will fucking figure it out. But if you are just fighting, if you're just coming out swinging at each other, or worse, saying things that you can't take back, saying things that are designed to be hurtful, then nothing is accomplished. And all that comes from that is that two people are extremely hurt. So I just don't see a lot of benefit to fighting. I guess there's a burn off steam element to it, but again, I feel like there are better ways to do that. And I don't like blame. I don't think blame is helpful. And I'm the first to apologize if I do something wrong. I'll apologize for things I didn't do wrong. I've got a lot of Catholic guilt, but owning your screw ups is important. But using those as sticks to bludgeon each other with is not helpful. Blame doesn't solve problems. Now, if one person keeps consistently screwing up and then they're like, oh, well, blaming me doesn't help, we need to get to the bottom of this. Yeah, at that point, it's probably worth having a conversation with maybe a third-party mediator to be like, all right, let's figure out why you are the one that keeps fucking up. But by fighting over, yes, an actual like raised voice argument is what I mean by fighting. I'm not talking about just physical stuff. I mean like raising voices, yelling at each other over a point of conflict. Usually it involves blame. Frequently it involves saying incredibly hurtful things. Rarely does it solve anything. It just doesn't. Because it is directing the energy at the wrong thing. When there is a point of conflict in a relationship, the energy should not be directed at the other person. It should be the two people directing that energy at the issue at hand and figuring out how to solve it. And if it's unsolvable, that's an issue. And if it comes down to one person's behavior or one person's words or something like that that are consistently problematic, then that person, if they are 100% on board with the relationship, should be willing to do the work to reduce that. Ideally, eliminate it entirely. But again, this circles back to everybody involved being on board with making it work. And raising voices is rarely effective. It's not. And I'm a very emotional person. I cry at refrigerator commercials. I cry when I'm frustrated, like not just sad, but when I'm angry, when I'm frustrated, when I'm just, there's so many reasons, even when I'm just raging, sometimes the tears just come out because something needs to come out, you know? And it frustrates me because I know tears are seen as weak a lot of time. I don't think they are, but I know they're seen that way. And it feels like my feelings, even in my own head, become minimized because, oh, you're crying about it. So that's something that I continue to work on, is the emotional side. And it's not that I'm trying to stop from that happening. It's more about accepting myself for who I am. But directing emotional outbursts, negative ones, at your partner is almost never an effective way to resolve a conflict. It's just not. Cries at refrigerator. Yeah, I cry at everything. I mean, this is why JoJo and I are in the Crybaby Club. Because everything makes us cry. Like, yeah. I know tears are not weak on paper, but I also get very frustrated with myself when I cry because I'm angry or frustrated. Like, that feels like a poor use of my tear resources, I guess. But then again, like, and I appreciate you, JoJo, if you're still here. I appreciate you so much for sending me videos that make me cry because I like them. They're so sweet and precious and amazing, and they move me. And even if I cry about it, it's a good cry. So, yeah. So yeah, to try and bring all of this full circle, writing healthy relationships, for me, comes down to respecting each other's agency, having equal partners and a minimal power dynamic, both sides giving 60%, not using words like always and forever, that being a personal preference for me, reevaluating regularly to make sure that everybody's on the same page and on the same path, and underlying all of this, communication. Holy shit, guys. So many problems could be solved with communication. Like, God, just talk things out. But again, this is something that people struggle with because it is difficult not to start playing the blame game. I'm upset and you are why. This thing you did made me upset, or something like that. When there is a point of conflict, when there's a point of somebody being upset about something, it is so easy to start pointing fingers. But you can't do that and expect anything to get done. You can't get anything resolved that way. It makes no difference. Even if you feel like you desperately want to punish somebody, like, It doesn't matter. That's not where resolution comes from. Communication, for me, is basically about a couple of important things. One, being able to put your own thoughts and feelings into words in a healthy fashion. Oh, Kalana, my beautiful Princess Goober. I'm so glad you're here. It's good to see you. Yeah, I statements are important, but also we statements. We statements, I think, are underrated if we're talking about romantic relationships. Always and forever use someone's name multiple times. Yeah, super helpful. So yeah, being able to effectively communicate your own thoughts and feelings. But the other side of communication is the listening side. And this is the side that people suck at the most. And you see this across the board. You see this even in media. You see this in even like the VR chat RPs that I watch, this becomes an issue, that people are so eager to talk that they do not listen. They're so eager to say their part that they're not responding to what somebody else says. They're just saying their part. It becomes a bunch of talking heads with absolutely no engagement, and no progress is made because there is no listening. You have to listen and take a minute and process. And empathy can be hard. It can be hard to put yourself in someone else's shoes and be like, this is what they're thinking, this is what they're feeling and saying, like, I need to see this. And there is a level of emotional load that you have to manage here because, and I'll give an example, and I think I've actually talked about this before, but I had an ex once who would occasionally say offhand things that were extraordinarily hurtful, just off the cuff. And when I called him on it and said, those things you are saying are hurtful to me, his response was basically, you should know that I care about you. You should know that I would never say anything hurtful on purpose. So if I say something that comes across as hurtful, you should interpret that as not being hurtful because I would never mean it that way. So he was basically putting the emotional work on me to parse what he was saying and translate it into something not hurtful because he would never mean it that way. He was abdicating his responsibility to police his words. And that's not okay. I mean, we have to interpret each other. We have to read between the lines on what each other says, but we also have to police ourselves. We can't just dump words and expect the other person to do the work of figuring out what the fuck we're talking about. Like, that's just not okay. So the words that come out of your mouth should be measured. You should think before you speak. You should take your time and come up with the best possible way you can think of to say what you need to say. And it doesn't have to be perfect. It can be a little fumbling. Hey, thank you for the follow. Welcome. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it needs to be at least a little premeditated. And then when the other person talks, we have to listen and try to process it rather than just wait our turn to talk. You know, don't just wait your turn to talk. Listen to what the other person is saying. Hear them, internalize it, take a beat, and then say, okay, this is what I think you're saying. Or if I'm understanding you right, this is what you're getting at. And try to do that, and then let them correct you or adjust what you're saying or whatever. Go back and forth like that. I also find sometimes that, like, if you're in a romantic relationship and tensions are running really high and tempers are really hot and you're having a hard time coming up with, like, healthy words to say to each other, sometimes the best thing is just to sit holding hands. Like, that physical contact has a way of releasing the happy drugs in the brain a little bit and taking things down just a notch. It's not always helpful, but it does occasionally help. So, yeah, there's that. But again, a lot of this circles back to intent. If both people in the relationship are intent on making it work and intent on being the best partner they can be for the other person while maintaining their own agency and autonomy, then this should all sort of fall into place, the communication side. And that's why when I do my more relationshipy audios, my comfort audios, my girlfriend audios and stuff like that, sometimes they talk about pretty heavy topics, everything from diffusing an anxiety attack to this most recent one about the toxic ex, you know, talking about somebody coming back into your life. They are an opportunity for me to paint a picture, to set a scene of a conversation that I think a lot of people have had and play it out in the healthiest way that I can. And because it is just me talking, It's just, it's a one-sided audio format with very little soundscaping in those. It is me walking through the communication process of that scenario. And the listener's responses are, of course, implied, and I try to make those as clear as I can based on what I say. But at the end of the day, they are, to a certain extent, a teachable moment. And people do pick up on this. I get a lot of comments in the comments on the YouTube videos of, this is such a healthy relationship, or I'm going to save this for the next time I'm actually in a relationship, stuff like that. And I'm glad people see it. Like, this is not supposed to be a super secret thing. I'm glad that people notice that the relationships that I write are meant to be healthy and meant to be, in some ways, evidentiary in that way. This is evidence of how a healthy relationship should play out in this particular scenario. And that's not to say it's the only way it can play out or the only words that could be spoken in that situation, but my characters do a lot of work to, and a little of this is exaggerated because it is an audio, but a lot of work to ask questions, frame the situation, say, I think this is what you're getting at. I think this is the problem. Let's talk about how we can fix this, and encourage that mutual understanding and that mutual work towards an outcome. And there's a lot of listening and validating the listener's concerns, validating and appreciating the listener's participation in this situation. Thank you for talking to me about this. Your feelings are 1000% valid. What you are saying makes perfect sense. I understand you. I hear you. I understand you. I am processing what you have to say, and we are going to get to the bottom of this. We're going to fix it together. We are a team. Those are how you create a safe space to have these conversations so that people feel comfortable bringing their concerns to each other, and also how you frame it in the best possible way to go forward and fix it. That's really the best I can do from a one-sided audio format, is try to model those behaviors in a simple and, slightly sanitized way. You're making notes. Hydrate. Sandwich, oh my gosh, thank you. Thank you for the tip. And Stream Elements hates your guts. Man, one day I'm going to send them a note and be like, okay, so there's this one person in my chat, and you never acknowledge him, you bastards. You bastards. Shake my tiny fist at Stream Elements. You will fix this. And then see if they say. I mean, there might be some ghost in the machine there that's getting in the way. I would love to know what it is. And Burrito with the Goober Redeem, Tex-Mex Goober. Hello. Thanks for being here. I guess you've been lurking. You got a lot on your plate going on lately. We acknowledge our sandwich. We do. Sandwich, you are our sandwich. By God, we acknowledge you. Sandwiches, burritos, all the food groups. So yeah, wow, we've been at this for 2 hours, you guys. I feel like I kind of have hit on all the major peaks, I suppose, in my framing of healthy relationships. Largely, again, romantic, but even just other dynamics and the importance of, like I said, basically what it comes down to: communication, effort, understanding, retention of your own autonomy and agency, frequent temperature checks, and intent more than anything, I guess. The intent of making something work in a healthy way. So I think that sums it up, don't you? I certainly hope so. All right, on that note, I should probably wrap it up. I got a doctor's appointment in an hour, so I should probably get ready for that. And then a busy day ahead of me. The short for the next Alien Queen audio. Mages, thank you for the $5. And yes, Stream Elements does see you. Why does it say testing? Oh, testing tip alerts. That's what you said. God damn. It hates you, Sandwich. It's so wild. Yeah, the next Alien Queen audio will be out Monday. The early access is already up on Patreon, and the preview is on Shorts, YouTube Shorts. because I'm dipping into shorts. And I figured out how to animate the backgrounds. So there's some little flashy lights in there now. Nothing like seizure inducing, just to make it interesting to look at, more interesting to look at. I'm very excited about that. I'm putting my Photoshop to better use by animating within it. Not going full After Effects, just playing with Photoshop a little bit. So yeah, I'll be back for New Week, New Game in a couple of days. And yeah, I appreciate you guys hanging out. I know these streams are talky and there's a lot to them. And sometimes we get into the weeds on some pretty heavy shit. But you guys you're great at making me feel safe talking about these things, if that makes sense. You are contributing to the safe space and the discussion space, and that means a lot to me. I'm very, very grateful. So on that note, as always, be good. I'll talk to you soon.